be great if we started the session by everyone just introducing themselves so we can make sure your mics are working and so everyone in the audience knows who you are. I don't think you need to turn them on, guys. They should be working. Jyane, shall we start with you? If you could just introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Jyane. I'm the Global Head for Marketing Strategy at Standard Chartered Bank. And I look after the segments of Wealth and Retail Banking, WRB. It's actually a recent rebrand, but essentially the customer segments of consumers, private banking, and business banking.
Thanks. Sonya.
Hi, I'm Sonya David. I am the Head of Strategy at Dentsu, Singapore. I work very closely with the people who know a lot about data. I tend to approach it from the perspective of audience, experiences, connections, etc. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nishanth Raju, Nish. I'm the MD of Lotame for APAC. I've been at Lotame for about 10 years. I'm probably aged about twice in that last 10 years. And all we do is data, so.
Fantastic. And Dan.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan. My team are the custodians of all of Yahoo's customer and consumer data across the region, but more importantly connecting that to omni-channel media and working with insights and measurement with brands and agencies.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So this conversation is designed to be focused very much on practical data strategies. We've heard quite a bit this morning, right from the top of the day, my opener focusing on the importance of first-party data gathering, right through to the opening panel session where we talked a bit about the impact of cookieless targeting, the excellent sort of deep dive, short-form deep dive from Shaylee that we just got on technical standards. So there's quite a lot for us to get to grips with. I want to kick this off by just understanding from a data perspective, how are you approaching a strategic a strategic positioning for data within your organisations? And I'm going to start with Jyane on that one.
I think when we look at data, the very, very first lens that we normally look at is to look at what is the set of business questions that we need to answer. And obviously, this goes, cascade down to different teams, right, and different functions. What is the marketing role and job to actually to be done here? And then as we look across strategically, there are different components of, whether it concerns data management or data quality, and data activation, for example, going back into execution. But fundamentally, what's really important is to invest in a data strategy, right? And this data strategy has to cut across the entire organization. For Standard Chartered, we're present in more than 50 markets. And for as long as, the history is like ours, more than a century, we're talking about, data in the market, data in the product, data in the customer segment, data in the function. And then what this means is you have to really holistically look at how you can consolidate your data together so that you can put together a unified view of the customer. This has been one of the top priority for us.
Quite a complex task by the sounds of things, very much relies on not just your own internal approach to data management within the organisation, but presumably leaning on some of your partners along the way to help you in that process. Yeah, okay. So Sonya, let's hear from you on the agency side of the fence. How do you support your clients to do the sorts of things that Jyane's talking about?
So obviously our clients, and Jyane is one of them, they have their goals about what they want to do with their data. And we have people who understand how to orchestrate some of those goals coming together and the maturity of making sure that the data is managed in that way. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is also about the activation part of it, right? So after you have the data and you're able to orchestrate it, you have a purpose for what you want your data to do in the organization. The question is, how do you activate against it? And that's where, the traditional media agency kind of for this thing tends to come in. I use traditional because it's about how do we activate and deliver those campaigns, but it's a little bit about moving forward along with the technology and the data advancement that we see in terms of using that to actually activate those campaigns. So they're a little bit of a different streams that talk to each other, and it's a question of how, if this is done, then this is also possible, and then looking to see how we move the bar higher and higher each time we do each of these parts of it.
Yeah, fantastic. So, that's a story about sort of from strategy to practical execution, which is really important. Nishan and Dan, I know you guys are going to have a lot of opinions on the data front and also from the tech side. Nish, when we spoke in preparation, you were really wanting to emphasise the value of data sets across the piece. So really, I guess from the perspective of preparing ourselves for a sort of cookieless marketing environment, we're talking about sort of authenticated data. But give us a bit of a perspective on that across the board.
I mean, we're still in that cookie deprecation phase, right? So, I mean, it's been going on for about 4 or 5 years now. Look, it's about time that we move past this phase and look at what's moving forward, right? So collaboration becomes such a key aspect because both Jyane and Sonya started with business goals. So understanding the business goals is super crucial. And collaboration could be both internal and external, right? So when you talk about Customer 360, you can look at it from an inward perspective and an external perspective as well. That becomes a Customer 720 from both inward and outward standpoint. So that's where the partners come in. That's where the external data sets come in. Probably an unpopular opinion would be like, hey, third-party data is going to be dead because of the back of the cookies and stuff. It is going to go away, but some form of third-party data will still exist because someone like SEB are very rich in data set from a first-party data set, but there are a lot of brands that have very little first-party data. So they'll always look for data sets that are external to be able to complement what they have internally. But again, it all goes back to what are the primary good business goals internally that they set, and how collaboration starts internally first, breaking down silos within the organizations. It could be tech teams merging with the marketing teams and analytics and data functions all coming together, making sure they speak the same language across the entire organization, and then partner with the right partners externally, because understand what complements your existing tech stack that is internal today, and how can we add more from an external standpoint to be able to actually build and tell a story to your consumer and connect with your consumers effectively moving forward.
And because we have to imagine that if we're talking about, sort of authenticated data, first-party data, but also other data sets, as long as they are privacy compliant and authenticated in some way and then matched and shared in a way that is privacy compliant, there are going to be other data sets available beyond your own first-party data sets, right? And I think what we're talking about a lot today is the technology infrastructure that knits all that together, makes it possible. That's a little bit what Shaylee touched on in the IB Tech Lab presentation. Dan, I know you've got really sort of, you're quite a champion for data culture in general within the clients that you work with, but what's your point of view on the sort of readiness of the industry to kind of embrace this data-first approach to marketing and advertising? What are you seeing with your clients?
Well, we've been around for about 29 years, so we've seen a lot of data over the years, and we're in a pretty unique position as well. We're an ad buying platform, we're a publisher, we're sitting on over 50 million logged in users who are buying and purchasing. So there's a lot of commerce data. So adding on what Nish was saying before, like having a good data culture, first and foremost, means a decentralized approach to data fluency across the organization. So breaking down the silos whilst maintaining a centralized sort of center of excellence. So you're ticking all the governance and privacy. So we've been doing that for a really long time, but I think the way our strategy has changed is, as an advertising business, is we've stopped going in and saying, here's a long list of things you need to do to transform your business. In addition to upgrading to the next Google Analytics or auditing your pixels, here's a list of things you need to do. And we've found that's totally overwhelming, particularly for the best marketing and privacy teams. So what we've done is we've housed all of that in a new consulting framework. And it's all added value, and it looks at good data culture before we get to discussing plugging in the pipes with technology, before we get to audience strategy and ad effectiveness, so we can ask the right questions and go in and make the right solutions. So that's been really, really helpful and been received really well by brands and also by agencies who are, I think we were talking about this before, Sonya, who are working really hard to get upstream to understand how the data is being used and how they can access that in the ad platforms. It's a huge job.
Absolutely, and we talked a little bit about that, not just the pressure on agencies to be supporting their clients, but the value that you guys can add. So I want to hear from you and Jyane on this point. How do you then bring some of that to life? Where, at what stage do you get engaged? Because also, obviously, you're working with a whole range of clients. Some are going to be quite sophisticated in terms of the readiness of their strategy, some less so. At what point do you sort of draw clients into this conversation about how they need to be organised from a data point of view?
I'll say at the start. So all data conversations have to start at the start, right? Because it always starts with purpose. What are you going to use your data for? How do you see it being used? What is the governance within the organization? And how is it allowed to be used? And that is especially important in, financial industries, BFSI, like banking, like insurance, all of those ones, they become really important. Especially, like you said, you have so much data. So you have all the more responsibility to do right by the data you have. It is different in the case of, our FMCG brands and things like that, where consumers are a lot more reticent about giving their data. So they have a different challenge, whereas industries like this that are data rich have a challenge about responsibility, privacy. How do you manage that? And they're often at the forefront of those kind of privacy spaces that you have. So it starts with how are you going to use the data? How can we use the data? And developing those use cases for activation, for building a steady approach, building out whether it's loyalty, whether it's creating data sets that match similar data sets like that. All of those things come into play. So it's important that the people who are going to use the data, both on the client side and on the advertiser side, have the ability to create those use cases so that when we do set the approach to data, they incorporate all of these.
And what about, I'm going to come to you in a second, Jyane, for a bit more on that. What about when you're working with clients that have a real, I'm going to say, block to their data strategy? Either there's not a lot of buy-in, perhaps from a strategic point of view, or there's just too many hurdles for them to overcome, or perhaps it's a size-related thing. How do you sort of try and tackle those challenges?
Conversations. Because, we know our clients, if they have blocks, those blocks are probably there for a reason. And it's a question of understanding the purpose of those, because with governance obviously comes blocks, right? And that's why we have the concept of privacy, we have legal, we have all of these stuff, right? So responsibility will create constraints on how you use data. And you have to talk about what's possible and what's not possible, and understand, what's available, what you can do, what you can't do. And sometimes there's information on both sides of the table. So it's more about how do you create the space to have those conversations and identify a way that works forward, that is compliant with what it needs to be.
Yeah. Jyane, what has sort of happened internally at Standard Chartered to make all of this work, and where you've come across challenges? What have those been about? Being a sort of a data-rich organisation, as Sonya points out, probably your focus is going to mostly be on maintaining security and safety from a regulation point of view. But have there been other challenges that have cropped up along the way that have made it difficult for you to really embrace this data-first strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so what Sonya said is right, in the sense that we're probably not the industry that's struggling with data collection. As a matter of fact, I do think we have quite a lot of data to work with, right? That would come at really insightful recommendations around how we can do activations differently, or how can we improve the way we do marketing. But fundamentally, if you look at where we are today, one of the biggest barrier to activation is actually data silos, right? To what I said about earlier in terms of, it could be just as a matter of how teams are being set up, or due to limited access for compliance reasons, right? So you have data sitting in different pockets. So we do look to our partners and looking at leveraging the right technology to bring all those data together, and especially where it comes to a unified view of the customer, or even to the more sophisticated where it concerns journey analytics, right? But if you look at what is going to really tie all of these together, there are two things, right? Number one is back to the data culture that you have spoken about. Because what's really important to go from insights mining to meaningful activation, and one that is going to be uniquely tailored for the customer, and one that is going to help drive a more differentiated customer experience, you need to first look into understanding your customers first, and then go about, okay, how can we do things differently? But to even look at that in the context of a universal bank like ours, where we cater to the mass, we have the credit cards and the personal loans, we cater to the affluent, and all the way to the ultra high net worth, where you are talking about billions of investment from a single individual. That is, you are looking at a whole range of different data set, right? So what's more important here is to be really strategic about, okay, so what is the right business question that we need to answer, and what is the right customer strategy? Within affluent, for example, if I talk about the Standard Chartered affluent client continuum, we have priority banking, we have priority private, and then we have private banking. But even just within priority is such a large segment, and within which you look into different personas, you look into, okay, where is our highest value customers? You look into where is the next generation of, more affluent that we need to grow, right? So that in itself would require a different strategy to engage, would require a different strategy to nurture, and it goes back to the whole marketing full funnel approach on how do you do things differently. So to do that, to bring this, what I call the connected intelligence in the organization, and to be able to form this effectively from data from your own channels, from your sales reps, from your branches, to your campaign audiences, you really need a super strong data culture, and this has to start from the top. And I'm glad that, Standard Chartered, we are a data-driven organization. All of our leaders and senior MTs, they're all, very data-driven and very supportive with a lot of the customer-centric data initiatives.
Huge job, really, to get all of that, to pull all of that together, right? From a tech point of view, what are you finding when you're working together with your clients? What are you finding, where are the areas where you are really able to add value in this data piece? I mean, obviously, at Lotame, you're a data-first sort of platform, but what are some of the things that you try to focus in on when understanding the challenges that brands and agencies might be facing?
And always starting there, right? So because the first things first is understanding the baseline in terms of where the data pockets are sitting, and what sort of technology infrastructure that's sitting within the organization, and how can we complement, right? As to Shaili mentioned earlier, and there's loads of other first-party data technologies that are out there, right? Tools out there. And it's more confusing for brands and agencies and most buyers out there, right? So it's clean rooms, CDPs, TMPs, data collaboration platforms as to what we are today. And there's more, like CRMs, and you can go back to the old school way of managing data, and some enterprise data warehouses as well. So how does all of these pieces of the puzzles fit in together? Do we even want to bring it all together at the first place is what we want to figure out, right, as an organization, internally and externally as well. And that's where we start with that being the baseline. And then one of the other most important things that Jyane alluded to, and Sonya as well, was the compliance framework and the privacy and legal requirements in terms of like how is that enabling brands to collect and manage their own first-party data. Are we able to maximize on everything that we can collect? And also the value exchange that it comes along with, like why does a consumer need to actually offer that first-party data? So that's where it all starts with as well. So getting that baseline important, correct is super key, and that's where it starts from a first-party data management standpoint. And with some of the conversations, then we go like external to inward, right? So because when first-party data management becomes extremely harder of taking that data outside, because a lot of these new initiatives are around modeling, for instance, and scaling, for instance, because one is customer engagement, because that could be heavily driven through the first-party data sets and bottom of the funnel. But as you move up the funnel, there's a larger addressability gap, right? So how do you find your next best customer? So that's coming from your external data sets. So some of it could be taken outside, managed through an external vendor or partner or tools like ours, or data could flow in. That could sit within their existing workflows, existing systems, and that's the models that they run is powered by some of these external data sets. Then the customer acquisition process would kick in from there onwards, right? So it's two different workflows in terms of engagement versus acquisition, but that's how I see things.
Yeah. Dan, a huge amount of sort of fragmentation on the technology side, a lot for brands and agencies to be wrapping their head round. How do you approach that issue of fragmentation? You know, yourselves, you've got a number of solutions that you like to go to clients with, and you have a very consultative approach, but how are you helping your clients get to grips with technology fragmentation?
Well, I mean, we all like personalised content and living on the open internet, so it makes sense to invest in that. It needs to go beyond just looking at whatever you can see in your analytics or Google Analytics platform. So for us, we've done a lot of work bringing everything together and making sure that we address two big issues. The first is marketers and brands are extremely conscious of compliance and with regulation. So that's why we've seen the growth of retail media, where brands have their own inventory and their own data. So as a business at Yahoo, we also have our own first-party data and consumers. We're not licensing or sub-licensing that. So that really ticks that consent and compliance box. The second point is removing costs. Cost is a huge barrier to entry when marketers are wanting to activate their first-party data. They've already invested a lot of money in data collaboration tools, moving from data management platforms to customer data platforms. We talked about clean rooms before. There's a lot of costs and a lot of work. So we don't believe in adding on extra costs to onboard, to match your data, to activate against your own data. And we've removed those as barriers to entry. So for us, compliance and removing costs is where we start. And that makes data flow through a bit easier.
Quite a powerful approach. Does that complexity then reduce? And I suppose what I'd also like to know from Sonya and Jyane is the fragmentation on the technology side of the ecosystem is painting this picture of lots and lots of partners. We've already spoken earlier on today about trying to sort of reduce the length of that advertising value chain, make a much closer connection, shorter connection between the buy side and the sell side. Is that a priority for you guys? Sonya, is that a priority for you and some of the clients you're working with?
Definitely. Reducing complexity is something that is more in focus now more than ever, even as we realize that we have a lot more data to work with. We need to know which data to work with and which is the most relevant for our purposes. So just having that purpose is one good way to, and understanding the different use cases, one way to decomplex, to demystify a lot of what we need to do and reduce that complexity a bit, right? And of course, understanding how you're going to use that data and what sort of privacy compliant technology you're going to be using is and therefore, what sort of preparedness or how do you prepare your data for that usage becomes really important, because just because you have the data doesn't mean that the data is ready for this thing, right? In effective, it's a handshake between two parties, because anonymity comes into the place, and only thing that you can do is by sense the strength of the handshake and what's in that handshake that you can actually create that connection. And there's no direct contact between the two data sets as such, right? So it's really important to make sure that your data is prepared for this kind of a handshake and a connection right across on both sides, both with the publisher as well as with the owner of the data, the brand data that you have. And that's why agencies come in to help define some of those contexts, define what's possible, and in the context of activation also say, suppose we could do this also. Which comes into a test and learn approach. Because as we move this barrier, this bar forward in terms of what is possible, test and learn is actually where we start optimizing, where we start building on context, where we start actually doing a lot more from what we thought was possible with the data that is on hand.
Jyane, from your point of view, are you looking to shorten that advertising value chain, get better value for money out of the advertising budgets that you're committing across your media plan? Is that one of your priorities?
I would say our priority would be we want to shorten our time to market. That would be our priority. And in other words, if marketing can get even more real time, that's definitely an area that we want to venture in. If you look at our customer segments, there are obviously a set of products that we can probably acquire customers through a bit more of a digital kind of approach, right? And these are the areas that we can leverage digital and go a bit more aggressive, continue to improve our maturity, and making sure that we capture our customers as real time as possible, right? But it's interesting because the other day, just in another business conversation, a senior MT came to me and asked, so who live above the line and who live below the line, So if you look at that question, essentially there are still customers where we would need to go with a different approach to engage with, a bit more of a experience-oriented approach, whether it's through events or sponsorships. So in that sense, if you look at the whole the holistic view of marketing operations, we have a pretty clear view of, I wouldn't say, specific to advertising value chain, but, a pretty clear view of, where we would engage with more of an ATL-focused approach, where we would go a bit more aggressive in marketing, but also where, we would, the segments where we would focus with a bit more of a, customer connections kind of one-on-one approach. And ultimately, for the total marketing operations, a clear view on where we want to insource and develop the capability in-house, but also where we continue to rely on our agency partners to continue to feed us with innovation and continue to improve the maturity of our organization.
Yeah, okay. Super interesting as well on that in-housing point. Again, we brought that up earlier this morning, that no matter how sophisticated the brand activations are, there's always going to be something that you need to rely on external partners for, quite likely, right? I'm just going to throw to because we're running out of time, I'm just going to throw to our poll that we've got associated with this particular panel session. So do please dive in, everybody, and vote. Wanting to know how strong your data culture is within your company. Of course, we've got a room of brands, agencies, and publishers. So if we give it a few seconds to get everybody to perhaps dive in and vote on that. And while we're doing that, I'm just going to throw back to the panel. Where do you want to see, if there's a couple of things that you'd like the market to be focused on in the coming 12 months to improve data readiness and data sophistication, to try to achieve some of the things that we know the buy side want to achieve, sort of more efficiency, better quality focused advertising, what would it be, Dan?
Okay, let's have a look at the question first. So about 50-50 have a strong data culture. All right, that's good. That helps us. I think what would I like people to focus on? Well, I think practical testing in platform is readily available, and it's actually really underutilized. We have the ability to simulate an internet free of all third-party identifiers or cookies right now, and actually show marketers the outcome. What is the impact to their reach, cost efficiency, and do that today. So that's something which more brands should be testing out. And I think it's also about making sure that we're easy and flexible to work with. So that's a big focus for us.
Yeah, great. Nish?
Very similar. Testing would be very crucial. We want to say, look, we're very early in the testing, but actually we had plenty of time to actually go through these tests. But again, from a timing standpoint, probably taken a little bit step back in the last few weeks now, but focusing heavily on that piece and ensuring that there's a flurry of options over there as well, right? So if you look at a portfolio of approach, ID is one of them, but obviously from an agency standpoint or a brand standpoint, they're looking at multiple different platforms, be it sandbox API or the identity, or it could be contextual, it could be curation, whatever, because we haven't even touched activation yet from that perspective. But then again, depending on the use cases, if it's just predominantly analytics and insights, then that's the collaboration piece that comes in. So I think we'll start to see more and more brand publisher direct conversations happening, obviously at scale as well. So because most of that has been powered by cookies today, and moving forward, that would be a key way in terms of moving forward from an analytics and insight standpoint. But from an activation standpoint, I think curation would start to take a center stage moving forward, because some of the levers and powers are moving towards the supply side from an activation standpoint, where data could be packaged on both sides, and it sits nicely because first-party data from a publisher standpoint, they understand their users better, they could package it from that side, and then brands could actually package what they understand about their consumers. Finding that nice middle ground is what's going to be crucial. And then we'll start to see a bit more of retail media, CTV, because attribution and measurement gets a bit muggy in this space. So that'll where some of the spends will start to go for at least for the next few months or so. This is how we see things moving forward. But again, collaboration is crucial. And then from an identity standpoint, keep testing and run, because there's 40% of that inventory today that's cookieless, and we could actually use that as a proxy to continue to test today.
I actually just want to add on that, because you're talking about the handshake before of data, but we've really been focused too much on just the addressable audiences. The reality is you're probably going to max out at maybe 30% match rate with your customer data against a publisher. So using that data to train AI for targeting and measurement, the non-addressable, there has to be more testing on that too. And I think that's a really good point you made.
So taking that into account, both what you've said, Nish, and also Dan, what you've added to that, Sonya, does there feel like there's a bit of pressure on now? Forget the deprecation of third-party cookie timeline. You need to be getting on with, working as hard as possible with some of your clients around data sophistication, and you need to be focused not just on the gathering of data, but the attribution piece and the measurement piece as well. Is that what's going on?
Yes and no, but the other things that also need to happen, right? Honestly, I leave the data maturity to the people who really know it really well. Since I approach it more from the audience perspective, the insight perspective, the handshake is important, what we can do with that data is important, but also what's ahead of that is how can we inform what data can do. So some of the words that we have touched upon over here, the experience, the value exchange, defining all of that is just as important before you even head into that data activation space. So creating that purpose of what that data is meant to do and what is the experience you intend to deliver, what is the brand's role in the consumer's life becomes so much more important and gives that purpose to that data. Data for data's sake doesn't work, right? So you have to decide what you're going to do with that data, keeping all these lenses in mind. And it comes down to what sort of an experience and a value exchange you want to deliver for the consumer that sets the context for all of this data usage. So that becomes really important. So yes, the pressure is there. Pressure comes down for agencies and for clients and marketers to understand the consumer much better, like we have said earlier, and understand what is it they want, what is it they expect from our brands like us, so that we are able to deliver those experiences and make even the data exchanges something that a consumer is willing to do. We can't just be focused only on the addressable part of it, and the non-addressable comes into play as well. That becomes really important because addressable is a very small part. Our consumer is a lot more bigger than that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so, Jyane, for you, sitting on, the advertiser podium there and wanting to get to market as quickly as possible, what are the things that you want to see in the next sort of 12 months? And are you focused on, testing new technologies? Are you focused on testing new ways of measuring the outcomes of your campaigns? Is that part of your priority?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I start with Standard Chartered. So there are two things we want to look at. Number one is simplification, because our data sit across hundreds of platforms across the markets. And this is the number one initiative. In fact, we announced earlier this year, we embarked on this program that we call Fit for Growth. We want to simplify our technology, our tech stack, and make sure that it's consistent as well from a global and local standpoint. The second thing that we're looking at is sophistication. And as we simplify, We also want to improve sophistication in the way we go from the connected intelligence to activation. And that includes journey analytics, that includes sequencing the events, right? That includes having a unified view of your customers, and then go even more in-depth to look at connecting these and feeding back to close the loop with business. So that's Standard Chartered. And in terms of what I would like to see from the industry, I think just last week I was in another tech summit. You know, we can clearly see the impact of when you connect your user data, your customer data with your campaign audiences data, right? As you marry the two, as you marry the first party from a brand and the first party data from a channel or a publisher, that is fascinating to me, because from there on, then you can really go about, you know, insights mining, go about tailoring different strategy to activate for business impact. So I do think, you know, advancements and innovations do progress together, and we're in a very, you know, pretty exciting space where it concerns data and technology.
I mean, I'm pretty sure that the sell side want to see that as well, so that could make for really exciting conversations. We've run out of time, but I want to thank you all very much for your involvement in this panel discussion. Please, a round of applause for Dan, Nish, Sonya and Jyane. Thank you very much.
Thank you.